Hey men, you know there's one thing that we think about more than anything else. In fact, several years ago, my wife said to me, I think all you think about is sex. And I said, no, that's not true. I think about a lot of other stuff. But it's true that I always think about sex in addition to those other things. You know, it's the one thing we think about more than anything else, but the thing we talk about the least. I mean, really talk about. I mean, have you ever been sitting watching a football game with a bunch of guys and the Cialis commercial comes on TV and somebody says, hey, do you guys struggle with erections too? Because we don't talk about it. Sex can be the source of our greatest pleasure as men and also the source of our greatest guilt and shame. It's the one thing that we have in common with every other man on the planet, and yet somehow we feel like our struggles must be unique to us. A couple of years ago, I began to dream, what if the church was a place where it was safe to talk about this stuff, where men could experience that veil of shame around sexuality just being lifted from us. So for several weeks, we're going to delve deep into the topic of our sexuality as men. Not so much about sex in our relationships. This is not about how to have better sex with your wife, but about the core of who we are as men sexually. When it comes to sex, why do I think the things that I think and do the things that I do and look at the things that I look at? And is there a difference between what's common and what's normal? In other words, if I experience what most men experience, does that make it okay? What are the things that I experience are there because God put them there, and what are the things that aren't a part of God's design? Some of you got married and you just assumed that after you got married you'd stop masturbating, and you come to find out that you're still doing that and you're wondering, is that okay? A lot of guys have images and fantasies that just play in our brain over and over and over. For some of you, it may be memories of stuff from your past. It may be pornography scenes that you've seen in the past. Sometimes our brains just make up stories somehow. Sometimes you struggle talking to a woman with a low-cut blouse. I know that if I'm talking to somebody and she's got a low-cut blouse, it takes everything in me to keep looking at her in the face. Why is that? I'm not unhappy in my marriage. I'm not looking for somebody else. A lot of you had sex before marriage and did things back then, and you know that you've been forgiven for those things, but they still bother you. And those images are still there, and it feels like there's still a hook in that. Why is it that when an attractive woman walks by me, even in the halls of our church, I'm tempted to turn around and see what the other side looks like? Some of you know what it's like to be at home late at night when everybody's gone to bed and it's dark, and you open up your computer screen and look at some pornography and then masturbate and then close the computer and hang your head with that feeling of like, why do I do that? There is a shame around this area that we as men experience so much, but God wants to lift that from you, because that shame is keeping us from being able to ask the most important questions in life. Like, when is pornography bad for you? I mean, is it wrong to look at the naked body of a beautiful woman? Aren't men just visually oriented? I mean, isn't that really just appreciating God's creation? Does it really only become wrong when it's sexually explicit? You know, it struck me a while back that in pornography, there's a group of men at one end that are addicted to pornography. And it seems like whenever I hear that talked about in the church, the words pornography and addiction show up in the same sentence. And granted, there's a group of men, a small percentage of men that are addicted to pornography. And then at the other end of the spectrum is a small group of men who really have never been exposed to pornography. I think in our church it's like 4 guys, I just have never met them. But in the middle is this huge group of guys that have been in some contact with pornography, but assume that because it's not an addiction, it must not be a problem. And that's the group that we're going to talk about as we get into this. And that brings me back to this dream. What if Christ Church was a place where it was safe for men to really get after this area of our lives? What if the shame that we've been carrying for so many years could be lifted? What if we could be free from the mistakes of our past that seem to plague us? Not just forgiven, but free. What would that do to not only our relationships and our marriages, what would it do to us as men? What capacity would it even open up in completely other areas of our lives as dads and in the church and in the community? So please, make time to join us on this journey. Grab some other men to experience it too, as together we may go where no church men's group has gone before.